Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to bury Michigan all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to bury Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue, and welcome to our Fresno State Visitors Edition. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Finally, it's time to tee it up and get this season underway. We've all read, watched, and listened to our fair share of season previews. Now it's time to see Team 145 in action. My guest today will be the radio play-by-play voice of Fresno State Football, Paul Loeffler. He'll join us in just a minute. Sharon held his presser on Monday, and as you might guess, the first question was, who will the starting quarterback be?
Yeah, we'll just see who practices better these next couple of days, and then we'll make a decision, whether it's Friday, whether it's right before the game. We'll let them know, then everybody else will find out at the same time.
Sharon was asked if he would entertain using a platoon system.
Seen it work, seen it not work, so we're just going to do whatever it takes to win. I don't think there's really a yes or no, or what's better, what's not. You go back to the years of Tim Tebow and Chris Lee. Worked out pretty well for them, but there's teams that have done it and haven't worked out well, so we'll just figure out what's our best formula to win.
He said now that school has started and it's game week, he's having fun.
Just ready to go, ready to practice, ready for meetings. I'm ready, today's the first day of school for the boys, so, we made sure we talked about going to class, being on time, sitting in the front, doing everything right, talking to a couple younger guys, hey, make sure you introduce yourself to the teacher. Shake their hand, say hello. Because they're like, what? Introduce? Yes, do that. It's going to help you in the long run. So, but watching them as they come back from class and then go to meetings, that's going to be the cool thing to see them. Oh, you guys had school today. Now we're back into football, and then you get this routine of a game week. So that's been the fun part for me.
He said there was still competition this week at several positions, including on the offensive line.
At center, we've got a couple guys. We got Dom Gadis, we got Greg Crippen, and we got Raheem Anderson. And right now it's still a competition, so we'll see who does it. I think Crippen and Dom have been the top two in camp so far, so we'll see how they, compete this week. And then at right tackle, Andrew Gentry, Evan Link have been the top two candidates there. So we'll see what happens this week, but I feel like we'll have more of a insight and cement as we go through the rest of the week.
My guest today says one thing is certain. Fresno State has never shied away from playing the best teams they can schedule, most of those on the road, and they will not be intimidated Saturday night going against the defending national champions. Up next is the radio play-by-play voice of Fresno State Football, Paul Loeffler. So stay with us. Joining us on our first visitors edition of the show this fall is the radio play-by-play voice of the Fresno State Bulldogs, Paul Loeffler. Great to have you with us, Paul.
Hey, great to be with you. Excited to get a taste of the big house.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time Fresno State and Meechigan have played, so that's exciting in itself, but it is your first trip to the big house, isn't it?
It is indeed. I've heard a lot about it, certainly seen it plenty of times, seen some magical moments there from a distance. Had some friends who worked there and played there, and it's going to be great to experience it firsthand.
Well, so for my listeners who aren't that familiar with Fresno State, maybe all they know is the Bulldogs are in the Mountain West. Give us a little historical background on the program, some of the really outstanding coaches who've been there, and the success they've had on the field over the years, because this is a darn good program.
Yeah, it depends on how far back you want to go when it comes to the coaches. But, you know, one of the early coaches here was a Michigan man himself, a guy by the name of Stan Borleski, who had a great career there and then had an undefeated team at Fresno State. Before World War II, Fresno State was getting really good under a coach named Jimmy Bradshaw. In fact, they cracked the national rankings, even as a small school, which was technically in a separate division back then. And in the late 50s, early 60s, they had some great runs, but it really took off when they hired Jim Sweeney in 1977. He had been at Washington State, and he came to this community and said, you know, I'm going to awaken a sleeping giant. And within a few years, they were winning titles, and they were building a new stadium. Unfortunately, that's still the stadium that they're playing in today. They've added to it a couple of times, but, you know, it holds about 40,000, and they'd like to improve that. But Pat Hill had coached under Jim Sweeney, followed him, did a tremendous job, and brought a bravado there, said, you know, we'll play anyone, anytime, anywhere. And he did that. You know, some Big Ten fans might remember him going into Camp Randall, knocking off Wisconsin in 2001 when the Bulldogs got up to number 8 in the country. They had the eventual number 1 overall pick that year in David Carr. Decade later, his little brother Derek was here with Devontae Adams. That team started 10-0, had a chance to go to a New Year's Six game, didn't quite pull it off. But there's a championship legacy here. You're looking for their 30th league championship. They've been in dozens of bowl games. They've produced top caliber NFL talent. Certainly, the Carr brothers and Devontae Adams come to mind, but you go back to people like Henry Ellard, Stephon Page, the best defensive player in the league last year, Deron Bland, was a Bulldog. And there's this mentality here. It's a part of California that's often forgotten. You know, we're 3 hours north of LA. We're about 3 hours southeast of San Francisco. We're very close to Yosemite National Park. If anybody wants to come visit, you'll even see some giant sequoia trees in our airport in Fresno. But we're where we grow all the food, right? So people that food that your listeners are eating every day is grown here. 25% of the food produced in this country grows here in the San Joaquin Valley. And Fresno's kind of the de facto capital of that. And Pat Hill really capitalized that in his 15 years. He put the green V on the helmet for the great San Joaquin Valley, and all the Wolverine fans will see that this weekend. But Jeff Tedford, who had played here under Jim Sweeney, came and won a couple more league championships. And just a few weeks ago, he unfortunately had to step down for health reasons. So it's another Fresno State alum named Tim Skipper who will lead them into battle. But this is a hard-nosed program, guys that don't mind being the underdog. In fact, they relish that role. You know, when the baseball team at Fresno State won the national championship in 2008, underdogs to wonder dogs was their mantra. And I think the football team has had more than its fair share of that mentality over the years as well. So all that to say, the Bulldogs are coming into the big house dreaming of a huge victory that would remind people that Fresno State's a contender for that first ever 12-team playoff.
Well, as you said, the Bulldogs have a history of playing anyone, anytime, anywhere. They'll start in Michigan this Saturday. The non-conference schedule is daunting, to say the least. UCLA and Washington State, that is a rugged start, isn't it?
Yeah, and that UCLA game was supposed to be in September. It got moved to the end of the season, so it's kind of an oddball where that'll be the regular season finale. But Fresno State's got a lot of confidence. The Bulldogs have beaten the Bruins 4 straight times, including their last 3 trips to the Rose Bowl. So that's one that the fans will make the trip. I mean, we've seen as many as 30,000 Fresno State fans in Pasadena for those games. And usually, at least the last 3 trips there in the fourth quarter, most of the Bruin fans are gone, and you hear the Fresno State chant going through the Rose Bowl. So they've got a lot of confidence when it comes to that rivalry. You mentioned Washington State. That'll be interesting. And even, I think there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say trepidation, but certainly apprehension with the home opener against Sacramento State, because that's an FCS team that's played really well the last few years. And Sacramento State coming to Fresno State is kind of like Fresno State going to Michigan, if you look at it through the Hornets' perspective. So nothing's easy on this schedule. In this Mountain West Conference, home field advantage is a big deal. Timing is everything. You've got, several high elevation stadiums in this league, and that can change a lot of things. So it's really a dynamic conference where from week to week, just about anything can happen.
Well, let's talk about this year's Bulldog team we will see on Saturday and start on the offensive side of the ball. Mikey Keene is back under center. He threw for just under 3,000 yards last year, 24 TDs. So he's a darn good quarterback. So talk about him and what he brings to this offense, Paul.
He brings a lot of courage, a lot of confidence, and accuracy. Fresno State was unbeaten in non-conference play last year. They opened the season with a win at Purdue, who, as you know, had played in the Big Ten championship game the year before.
Mm-hmm.
Mikey threw a go-ahead touchdown pass in the fourth quarter of that game in his Bulldog debut. Followed that up with a almost flawless performance at Arizona State. And then later in the year, he had some injury issues. Their offensive line, they lost their left tackle, who it looks like may or may not be back for this game Saturday. That's a kind of a big key for Fresno State. And when that offensive line got banged up, he got banged up. They ended up losing 3 straight late last year. And before that, they were a real contender for a New Year's Six game. And that went out the window. Conference championship hopes went out the window. But Mikey got healthy for the bowl game and played exceptionally well in that New Mexico Bowl victory over New Mexico State. So I think he hit the offseason with a lot of confidence. This year, he's an unquestioned starter. Last year, he had to win the job. He's got tons of weapons around him. He's got a senior running back in Malik Sherrod who takes a little bit of that pressure off of him. And if this offensive line can hold together and give him a little time, his accuracy is a huge weapon, and it gives him that chance to pick defenses apart. He completed 67% of his passes last year.
And a big plus for him is that he has 7 of his top 10 receivers from last year coming back. That's a bunch. Talk about those guys and maybe who stands out in that group we'll see on Saturday.
This is a talented bunch. Jalen Moss was a breakout star last year as a redshirt freshman. Mac DeLena is in his last year of eligibility. He brings a grit and a toughness there. He's not afraid to catch passes in traffic. He's tough to bring down. As far as NFL prospects, you look at the body of Josiah Freeman and you say, yeah, he's ready-made, but he hasn't really found consistency yet, and this year gives him a chance to do that. They've added a lot to that position in the offseason. They brought in a guy in Shaden James who was a 1,000-yard receiver at the FCS level at Idaho State. Will be very active in the return game. Raylan Sharp had a similarly productive year at Missouri State and has transferred in. Got another young man named Lyndon Rivera who I think is going to get some time there. No shortage of weapons at the receiver position. Tim Greer is another one. So, you may see some rotation in personnel there, but a couple of those guys have some game-changing speed and elusive ability. Mac DeLena, his kind of signature play was Fresno State's last trip to the Rose Bowl, and some fans might remember that. Jake Haener, who's now with the Saints, led the fourth quarter comeback, and they beat the Bruins in a wild one, but Haener never would have had his chance at heroics if Mac DeLena didn't run down from behind on a kick return the state 100-meter champion in California, the toughest state to do it in, a guy named Kaz Allen. And so that's one of those plays that just showcased his desire and his athleticism. And I think he's a little bit under the radar because he hasn't had a huge season yet, but he may have some huge games this year for Fresno State.
Well, the Bulldogs have the reputation of being an aerial attack offense, and I think they averaged just under 40 attempts per game last year. But the running game has been better than average. Leading rusher, you mentioned a moment ago, Malik Sherrod, he's back. He ran for 966 yards and 9 TDs last year. He is a really nice back, isn't he?
He's one of those guys who punches above his weight class. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he's tougher than nails. He's a lot better in pass protection than you'd expect him to be when you look at his size. Very elusive, very quick. His signature play last year was a 95-yard kick return touchdown at halftime against Boise State. Really changed that game, and it was one of those where time had expired before he reached the end zone, so it was do or die. And he made sure to electrify that crowd. But he's really good out of the backfield. very versatile back. I think it'll be interesting to see what else emerges there. Elijah Gilliam was good in short yardage for him last year and along the goal line. He's not bad out of the backfield either. He's a bigger back who's more elusive than you think, but pass protection has been a bit of an inconsistency for him. So he's a solid change of pace for Sherrod, and they've got a few others in the mix. There's a true freshman, Bryson Donaldson, who I think is going to earn some time this year. But they feel good about the depth there. And as far as the balance of the offense, I think that's one of the interesting wrinkles with the coaching change because, Jeff Tedford, well known for his offensive philosophy, he always said it's not about, the same number of rushing plays versus passing plays, but the ability to do either when the situation calls for it. He's got a young coordinator in Pat McCann who clearly last year liked to put the ball in the air. But Tim Skipper's brother was a great running back at Fresno State. Tim was a linebacker, but he used to coach running backs at Fresno State. And the coach that Tim played for, Pat Hill, was famous for taking the air out of the ball and playing keep away from the opposition by grinding out, 8-9 minute drives and keeping that other team's offense on the bench. So is Tim Skipper going to have a little bit of that wrinkle this year? Is he going to be more like Jeff Tedford with a little bit of Pat Hill style in there? He hasn't told us yet, and I'm waiting to find out.
Well, offensively, we all know the offensive line is key to any team that's going to have success. Fresno State returns 4 starters in the trenches. I know you mentioned there could be an injury issue at left tackle, but overall, is that expected to be a solid group and a strength for the team?
You hope so. There's a lot of experience there. Mose Vaval makes the move to center this year. He's their most experienced lineman, preseason all-conference guy. Braylon Nelson has played right tackle, and he's a senior now. Big body, very consistent. Spomer is the young man who got hurt last year and missed the second half of the season at left tackle. So they've got a former walk-on who's a sixth-year senior now named Osmar Velez, who's very versatile. And I think more than anything, they have more depth on that O-line. So they have a few guys with position versatility. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how they perform. To me, that's the biggest matchup in the game because I don't need to tell your audience how good Michigan's front seven is. And the test of Fresno State's O-line against that group, I think, is going to tell us a lot.
Well, over on the defensive side of the ball, only 5 starters return. The good news is the secondary is very solid, very good. They were tied for 4th in the country in interceptions last year with 17. So talk about those guys, Paul, and the depth they have there.
Yeah, and it's interesting. They did that while missing, their most likely interception candidate, a guy named Cam Lockridge, for more than half the season. He had been all-conference the year before, the defensive MVP of their conference championship game when they beat Boise State. Had a couple picks in that game, but he got hurt 5 games in last year. So he's itching to get back out there. And especially because his granddad and his uncle finally get to go to one of his games. And I only mention that because his granddad is Ken Griffey Sr. and his uncle is Ken Griffey Jr. So they're going to be at this game. I don't know if Junior is going to be maybe on the sidelines doing his photography bit. But Lockridge is a game changer in the secondary. To have him back at corner is huge. I really like their linebackers. They've got a run stuffer in Malachi Langley, who's a 6th-year senior. They've got a team captain now in CV Nomura who can really get after the quarterback. He's a transfer from USC. And maybe the best athlete on the team is another linebacker named Phoenix Jackson, who's just a guy who can go sideline to sideline. He can be effective against the run, but drop into coverage. And a lot of times the quarterback doesn't know which one he's doing. So he's a guy I think is going to be a playmaker for him. And they've got a lot of depth up front. Devo Bridges, another 6th-year senior, anchors that D-line. He can play inside or outside. And they brought in a transfer from USC and Corey Foreman, who a couple of years ago was one of the very top recruits in the country. And I think Bulldog fans are really eager to see what he can do in the pass rush element.
You mentioned Devo Bridges, and of course, yes, the USC transfer Corey Foreman, one of the most talented players in the country coming out of high school. This was a team that last year got a lot of pressure, a lot of hurries on opposition quarterbacks. So I would think that is expected again this year.
Well, you hope so. And the other piece of that is they've got a guru pressing the buttons in Kevin Coyle, who's, been around the game for so long at the college level, the NFL level, worked for a lot of power conference teams. And when he has this kind of depth and this kind of experience, it kind of turns him loose on the creativity side of things. There's some buttons he's willing to press that maybe with a less experienced or less familiar team, he wouldn't. So, and the idea is, you generate some heat. You force turnovers, you give that offense a short field. And when his defenses are really clicking, that's what you see. I mean, you see an offense that never really settles in because it never knows where the heat is coming from. And, in game one, I don't know how much we'll see. I think both teams probably have a few question marks in terms of scouting because of the coaching changes and some of those variables. And that's going to be another fun thing to watch, is how these coaching staffs adjust on the fly on Saturday night.
Well, another aspect of the Fresno State game I know that's strong is the kicking game, field goal kicking. Dylan Lynch, he's a heck of a weapon, isn't he, Paul?
He sure is. He's got a very strong leg. He's a lefty. I saw some people playing that NCAA football video game, and some of those games had him right-footed, but he's a lefty. And, he's solid 50-plus yards. I mean, he routinely nails 55, 57, 58 in practice. And, I know the onside rules have changed, but he's been effective in that too when needed. In fact, maybe the biggest play this decade for Fresno State was an onside kick he executed against San Diego State 2 years ago that fueled that championship run. So he's a player that his teammates have a lot of confidence in. Punting game might be a little different this year. That's kind of an X factor right now. They brought in a young man from down under who hasn't played in a college game yet, and so we'll see how he fares in the big house.
Well, last year Fresno State was 9-4, ended the season in the New Mexico Bowl with a big win over New Mexico State. So what would you say are reasonable expectations for this year's team, Paul?
Well, I've got to be honest with you. When it comes to the Red Wave, which is what Fresno State's fan base is known as, the words reasonable and expectations don't always belong in the same sentence. I have the privilege of sitting next to Pat Hill every game. He's the head coach for 15 years, and assistant here before that, and loves the program as much or more as anyone possibly could. And, he was one of those guys who would play the big boys, as you know, and beat multiple Big Ten teams. But it was never enough, right? People always wanted more. So the expectations are always high here. And knowing that there's that carrot out there for at least one group of 5 team this year in the 12-team college football playoff, naturally, Fresno State fans they think that belongs to the Bulldogs. So their expectations are sky high. I think, if you ask the fans, they think anything less than 10 wins would be a disappointment. Whether that's reasonable or not, we'll see. But let's see what kind of momentum they can generate in this opener.
Well, final question before we let you get away, Paul. During this very busy game week, and again, we appreciate you taking time for us. And I'm not even sure what the point spread is for the game on Saturday. I rarely look. But from the Michigan media and people around the program I talk to, what I'm hearing from the team, they expect a really tough game, a battle this Saturday. Fresno State, as you mentioned, has played plenty of the best in college football in the past. They won't be intimidated by the fact they are playing the defending national champs in a night game, will they?
No, I think historically those are the situations that have brought out the best in Fresno State. You go back to 2005, I bet a lot of Michigan fans remember that. USC was the defending national champion, and the Trojans had, a long win streak, around 30 games. And Fresno State went into the Coliseum. That was the Reggie Bush, Lendale White, Matt Leinart team. Fresno State had the lead in the fourth quarter, and without throwing a late red zone interception, the Bulldogs might have ended that long winning streak. Fresno State was ranked 16th at the time, so the Dogs were no slouch. But, it's those kind of opportunities, playing a defending national champ on primetime television, under the lights. That's why people come to Fresno State. Pat Hill always said that was his biggest recruiting edge. It was, hey, you're going to play in some big-time games with a lot of people watching and have opportunities to showcase your talent against the best out there. So, I think that Tim Skipper, being this head coach and being as young, as energetic, as charismatic as he is, he's got a rapport with the players. And I think he'll do a good job of settling them into the right mindset, because some teams get in a stage, a scenario like that, and they get too hyped up, right? There's too much juice flowing. I think he'll find the right balance that first quarter is going to be awfully interesting on Saturday night.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's the opener, and you never know what's going to be happening in an opener. I just have Appalachian State always sticking in my mind. I think most Michigan fans do, is that you better bring it, whatever team you're playing in the opener. But it'll be great atmosphere in the big house in a night game. So we're all looking forward to it. And we'd like to say thank you again to the radio play-by-play voice of the Fresno State Bulldogs, Paul Loeffler. Paul, great to have you on the show with us, and we hope you enjoy your Saturday evening in Ann Arbor. Not too much, though.
Well, I look forward to seeing you all out there, and thanks for having me on.
On Quick Hits today, no injury news to report as we prepare for the opener. The only other news to mention is that the NOA for Signgate, if you want to call it that, was released on Sunday. We've all heard that by now. I suppose it's wishful thinking to hope we won't hear about it all season, but that's probably exactly what will happen. Doesn't help matters this week that Netflix will release the Sign Stealer documentary on Connor Stalions. There hasn't been much in the way of leaks as to what Connor will say, but it will undoubtedly be talked about for a long time, but it should be interesting. On Thursday, we'll be back with our Michigan Game Day show, and our guest will be the radio play-by-play voice of our Wolverines, Doug Karsh. We'll also have some interesting game day notes for you, as well as any news, and check out the weather for Saturday night's primetime opener. So make sure you tell your Wolverine family and friends about the show, and tune in on Thursday. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!